Following program contains language and subject matter that you may consider unsuitable for children. Parental discretion is advised.
Greetings from His Highness the Jackals.
The Jackals.
I'm going to pass the reins to Mr. Jackal, the new king of radio.
I think Jackal's Latino, I'm not sure, but he'll give it to you, Jeff.
The Jackals.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the big show here inside the Jackal's Head live on psn-radio.com. And, of course, as always, SoFloRadio.com. Big shout-outs to SoFlo and the Global Enlightenment Radio Network, who runs the stream also for us every week here. Big shout-outs to Odin and everybody making it happen over there. But with that said, I want to bring on board the guest of the next hour, the one and only Mr. Frank Jacob, who is a fascinating individual, a tremendously talented documentary director, and I have a feeling his future might bring more than just documentaries, because I've seen some of his work and it's exceptionally well put together. And I want to thank you for being here with me right now, Frank. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I look back at some of the stuff that you've done over the years, and you've been around for a good number of years, making really interesting stuff happen and work, which a lot of folks that are into the stuff that I'm into, like space, for example, might have looked at and said, wow, this is interesting, and with a very peculiar perspective. I know that some of the stuff you've done has been documentary style, obviously, but what kind of got you started and wanted to produce this kind of medium going forward and starting off?
Well, if you're talking about the feature documentary medium, it was a series of stages that led up to it. Mm-hmm. Originally, I was into music, and I started to, in my career, actually my professional career in the arts was as a musician. So I had this, when I was still in school, I took a film course, and I made my first ever film, and it was actually quite successful. I think I really caught the bug for making films then, especially since our teacher, gave us the pleasure of sitting, I think, for a month or two, and just watching films for the course. And I got to sort of study filmmaking in that sense. So I had this inkling that I would one day return to that medium. But at the beginning, I felt music was sort of my muse, and I created original music. I learned about studio recording. I went on the road with a band. I toured around in Canada for a while. And eventually I came full circle back into producing or making videos at about the time when music turned into a digital thing, and suddenly musicians had access to tools they never had before. It wasn't so expensive to make music, to record music, to make demos. And kind of the same thing happened when video became digital and you could afford your first basic video camera, and you basically start experimenting. So for me, that was the return to it, and I began to make films again and add the musical background into it. And one day I was sort of experimenting with live visuals as well, and I came up with this concept of what I called live cinema, which is where I kind of combined the idea of not just the visuals that you became used to seeing on club walls, that when you walked into a club and there was cool, like, moving wallpaper, as people call it. But I thought it would be cool to take that idea of the moving wallpaper and add a narrative to it. So for a few years, I began to film things and try them out, and it actually was really quite amazing. But it was a completely it was stressful, because the equipment, was constantly like you were riding really on a razor's edge as you were performing, because your laptop could crash at any second, the walls would go blank. So that was something I did for a while, but eventually it led me back into meeting some people that brought me that were working at the Red Bull Media House, and I got pulled into the Red Bull Media House editing sports shorts, eventually sports documentaries. Eventually I produced a show called The Ultimate Rush, which was half an hour extreme sports documentary shows And I just, again, fell in love with the idea of documentary filmmaking in terms of the reality of things being far more crazy than fiction, because especially in case of sports. So, but something was unfulfilling in making films just that were short, and I wanted to make something longer, and I began looking for a subject matter, and ultimately it led to me starting on the road down to what eventually became the film Packing for Mars. So
Which
it's
that was the first interaction that I was like, oh, this is good stuff. Like, who directed and wrote this? And then I saw your name, and I was like, okay, what else has he done?
cool. Well, the
Yeah.
idea with a film like Packing for Mars was to, I mean, it always been kind of a UFO believer, if you want to call it that, or somebody who believed that there was more to reality going on. I'd read some pretty crazy books on um, alternate reality perspectives, like
Hmm.
Jane Roberts, for example. She was doing something she was one of the first sort of authors to explore something called channeling, where she would go out of body and bring in this entity called Seth. Seth would be talking about the Matrix in essence, which we all have learned to understand in that terminology these days, which was that consciousness doesn't reside in the three-dimensional realm, but actually outside of space-time, and just
Hmm.
uses the three-dimensional space to express itself. And so
Yeah.
that led into all these subject matters, and I knew that doing sports films was not going to cut it. So I wanted to dive into that area, and I didn't really know where to go, but I began to go back into some of my past experiences, and one of them was the book Alternative 3, which was triggered by
Yep.
a radio show that I'd heard, where I heard somebody discussing having teleported to Mars, and that brought that
Hmm.
whole concept back into my world. And I thought, okay, now this could be a crazy film subject matter, not something usual. If you're going to go to the pain of making a movie, and it's pretty grueling to do something of a good quality, then that seemed like a subject well worth exploring.
It's funny, the fact that this is what focused you on Mars, the mental aspect as well as the physical aspect. I recently saw a film which was called Beyond the Sky. I don't know if you're familiar with this movie. It's about a person who was doing a documentary, kind of like yourself was, and he goes to the Roswell. Main part of where all the people go to gather with a little alien in. He goes down there to a convention, and he meets up with a girl, and he's trying to do a documentary on the encounters at Roswell, and he has his own alien experience. And in part of the movie, while it reminded me of your work, it was because part of his experience was a mental experience, meaning he was frozen in time, but mentally he was teleported somewhere, and he had a more astrological or out of body experience, where it was almost like if they physically pulled his soul out of his body, manifested it where they wanted him to be. And a lot of the people that talk about going to Mars are talking about teleportation. They're talking about physically still being here, but remote viewing to Mars. There's a lot of that that's involved. Also, a lot of the alien abduction deals with people having memories that are possibly experiences that they're having out of body with entities. And as I've reported over the years on this very show and other shows I've done in ufology, this is a theme that keeps coming up over and over again. So when I see it explored in documentaries, I'm like, this is important information, which to me is more important than somebody saying, yeah, look at all my UFO pictures. They could be done on Photoshop. Because these are real people having real experiences, and that's what I think is fascinating about documentaries like the one you made.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think that subject matter was, and one of the things I wanted to say that triggered me to make the film was that I'd noticed at the time that a lot of this kind of material isn't really covered
Correct. Yep.
it's not covered well in terms of pictures and sound. There
Hmm.
was a lot of YouTube stuff. Of course, when YouTube came up, it gave people the opportunity to put some of this stuff out there, but a lot of it was badly produced, and it didn't give you the feeling that that there was anything to it, because people have an association when the pictures and sound is bad that it can't really be true or real
Yeah.
because no one's taking it seriously, nobody's putting any
Right.
money into it. We've all been trained by the mainstream, to believe in the state of the art as being, that's where we're at, the cutting edge. But none of this material is really being discussed and presented in this way. And for me, that was the key. I wanted to make a film that utilized all of the skill set that I'd gathered over the years from audio production, sound production, music production into picture production. So putting this material and doing it justice and giving the protagonists the respect of a decent canvas, a decent quality, a decent platform to express it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the subject matter of remote viewing and of teleportation, it just sounds far out for most people.
Hmm.
But I do believe that in a very few years, we're going to start to break down into some new territory. We're going to break down some
Yep.
borders and enter in some new territory. Alone, the idea of remote viewing and of leaving your body, I mean, it's, you can look at that in a lot of different ways, because teleportation in the physical sense, you begin to ask yourself, what is physical anymore,
Hmm.
really? I mean, we produced a show for Gaia. We did 26 shows on the subject of this kind of material, like near-death experiences,
Hmm.
paranormal experiences, psychokinetic abilities, all of this stuff. All of this stuff made it clear that there's a whole group of people out there, researchers out there, experiencers out there who are crossing into this new territory. There's even somebody right now, a research group developing something called the soul phone, which sounds
Hmm.
far out. They're actually, 99% certain that they've made contact with, um, personalities that have crossed the death barrier, the
Hmm.
physical barrier into the other dimension, and have retained their consciousness and are interested and eager to express that back into our dimension, so that they're developing this thing called a soul phone. And it sounds wild, but we had Hans Otto Koenig on our show on Timeless, was what it was called. And he
Right.
was showing recordings that he had done using technology he developed, which ultimately turned into television, audio, visual expressions and communications back and
Hmm.
forth. And it was undeniable that it was real and that was going on, and that was something from some dimension communicating. So when people talk about remote viewing and teleportation, a lot of the terminology crosses over into the same terrain.
Right. It's ironic that this is a subject matter we're talking about, because I myself was a skeptic on the whole idea for many years, until I had a situation happen to me in 2016 where it opened my eyes to the possibility of the soul being real, the afterlife being more real than I ever thought could be possible. I lost my mother in 2016 to cancer, and my father and myself were in the hospital room with her until she took her final breath. I was arguing with the nurse who had given my mother bad medicine the night before and caused her to slip away, probably earlier than she would have died. My father was holding her hand. As I'm arguing with the nurse, my mother passes away. My father, not a very religious person, not a person who was ever an advocate to go to church every Sunday or anything of that nature. He's your typical guy, loves sports, rather watch baseball or football on Sunday than go to church. That type of individual. Very, even though he's Cuban, very American in that sense. And ironically enough, he was standing next to my mother, and he literally told me that he saw her soul leave her body, and the physical aspect of her body, the moment the soul left, he said her body completely changed, and it was immediate. The soul looked back at him, or whatever the apparition was, like, that he was visually seeing, looked back at him and then just floated away and disappeared. And he says he saw this person leave my mother's body, starting like if they were sitting up from the table.
Wow.
And yeah, and it was like a misty apparition. Now, I didn't personally see that. Again, I was arguing with the nurse. But my father, not a very religious guy, not a Bible thumper. He swears by his life. That's what he saw. I have no reason to doubt him whatsoever. I do know that the moment that my mother stopped breathing, I felt a cold spot in the very area where I was standing, which was right next to her feet. And I felt this incredible cold rush go right through me. The nurse even felt it. And the moment that I looked back, because I felt the cold rush, I looked at my mother's face and I noticed that it had changed. And I said, "Oh my God, she's not breathing." And that's when my father looked at me and said, "She's gone. Like she is." I physically saw her leave the body. And that moment changed my entire perspective on the afterlife. If it wasn't for probably that, honestly, because my mother was my best friend and losing her, I was near suicidal for a bit. If it wasn't for that talk by my father and him telling me that immediately, I probably would have been worse off emotionally. But he looked at me with his face like he was stone white, by the way, Frank. I mean, this shocked him to the core. And he said, "This is what I saw. I was always a skeptic. I am not anymore. And son, you should not be after. I'm telling you what just happened." And I said, "The moment you saw what you said you saw, I felt a cold spot rush right through the room."
Well, it's
And
totally legit, and it's
yeah,
totally real, because I can tell you, Angel, that there's been we've discussed this with many people. Like, I think we had over 75 guests on the show, ultimately 26 hours, and they're always
wow,
talking about similar experiences. And
yeah,
when you're directing and producing a show like that, you're just listening. You're sitting there listening to this, and you're going, "I can't believe what I'm hearing."
yeah,
But it's clear that it isn't just isolated cases. These people were the tip of the iceberg. They were referencing a body of work that goes back for decades, that really just makes it very, very clear that life does not end inside of. We don't live only inside of these physical vessels. That life is much richer and much more
diverse, you could say almost.
or expansive than
Yeah,
we condense. You could almost say we condense our reality down into these bodies,
yeah,
and to have a limited perspective. We deliberately limit our perspective in order to experience just that set of qualities, or that set of experiences which are possible within the physical dimension. And many of the people that have returned from near-death experiences report on the kind of multidimensional realm. Timelessness, travel is instantaneous, and the people that are the people that are developing this soul phone are reporting that the entities on the other side are they're like, some of them are scientists. Maybe it's Tesla, for example. Imagine if you could pick up a phone and you could dial up
call
your mom,
Tesla.
or call Tesla, right? And they're
Yeah,
focusing on people like Tesla, and the geniuses and the artists, because I guess these people may give, first of all, they're well known to a large amount of people on the planet, and secondly, the scientists are interested in perhaps contributing to the next step of human evolution, because we've been in this sort of on this track of, if you look at human evolution and you look at the first forms of print, when they say the Bible was the first printed document. Interesting, of course, but just the fact that there was printed paper at that time and people began reading and writing and exchanging information, that's been a couple of hundred years, not really that long.
yeah,
But long enough to make you think that, hey, that things should have evolved a lot quicker, but they really haven't. We are really not any more complex now than we were. If you look at Mozart's letters back to his father and his sister, and back in the 1700s,
yeah,
you see a remarkable intellectual capacity that you could almost say in this day and age has disintegrated. If we're down to tweets of less than 200 characters. I mean, what the kind of descriptive passages that Mozart was giving in his letters 300 years ago, 250 years ago,
poetic.
was very. And the music, he would
Yeah,
create classical music in his head while he was in a stagecoach on the way between Vienna and Salzburg, and at the end he'd have a finished orchestra, symphony. I mean, that shows you that we really haven't evolved. In fact, we may have even devolved on certain levels intellectually since then. So we're looking at, if humanity wants to evolve and move, we're expecting the next evolutionary leap. It has to be something on that level. It has to
yep,
be some crossing of a barrier, where the things like communication with other dimensions leads to us accepting the technology, which, as we learned when we made Packing for Mars, seems to have existed now for almost, I guess, close to 100 years.
Yeah.
Things like teleportation, things like, telepathic communication. These are remote viewing. These are the norm and the technology that certain beings seem to be accessing, which we witness in terms of the little flying saucers that we see flying around and making their appearances. The big pink elephant in the room, if you will, that never comes into the discussion. I've been privy to many discussions where people are talking about paranormal or even politics. How could any politician in our day seriously be taken seriously who isn't addressing the full spectrum of physical experience, and that includes that anomalous thing that's going on around us. There are all over
Look at
the
the
world.
Pentagon. Look at the
Right.
Pentagon with the UFO videos they now acknowledge. I saw those
Yes.
years ago. I saw those videos half a decade ago.
Well,
But
they're
now they're acknowledging them.
2004.
Yeah, now they're acknowledging them. It's taking time. But let me ask you a question. Do you think while technology is advancing a lot of our life when it comes to like things like doing documentaries are a lot easier now because of technology, doing films, doing technical stuff is a lot easier, but it is in a sense also uh, dumbing down the youth, because when, like you were saying about Mozart and his stories and his letters and how he would put almost a poetic letter together even to write to his parents or his family or his friends. Now it's 100 and something characters on Twitter, and we shrink words down to like letters. Like instead of saying laughing out loud, we say LOL. I remember when we would laugh out loud and we would just put haha. Now it's literally LOL means laughing out loud. So it's no longer little things. Now it's big words grouped together into like three letters. And it's a whole different language where people don't even understand how to like properly write words down or spell words or how to use grammar properly, because they're so dumbed down by the medium that is created, which is supposed to help us move forward technologically, but it does seem like it's having that dumbed down effect on some people. It's incredible.
Well, I mean, I think it's sad to say, but it
Yeah.
seems to be a part of our evolutionary step that it's moving, and it's like if the universe is expanding, or if you don't want to go into the expanding universe notion, just the idea that physical consciousness is expanding, or exploring new dimensions in all directions. You could say that on the one hand, there's a group of people developing very, very high levels of consciousness, very fine and precise and yeah, very yeah, I guess just evolved levels of thinking. By the same token, there seems to be a push in the other direction as well. Perhaps it's that there's a group of people that we've all heard about, these 13 families, the bloodlines, whatever you want to call them, that have had access to these technologies before we've had access to them, and have found that there's a way. It's almost irresistible for them to succumb to the temptation to utilize this technology for their advantage. And part of the,
Very true.
I guess,
Yeah.
part of the realization of that advantage is to make sure that because I'm sure they must know the full meaning or the full expression of human consciousness would probably threaten or impinge upon their ability to have power or control over the rest of us.
Yeah.
And so they would do whatever they could to naturally block it any way they could. So they can do this. We've now learned through using frequency, using pictures, using all forms of technology that some of them we don't even know about, that they're just being developed in secret. But every now and then little patents leak out about the use of electromagnetic frequencies on your screen, on your computers, on your music. And I mean, even and then down to symbology, which is another very interesting topic. A lot of these videos that are being explored by kids, mostly are video, are like the short form video of the music video, the rock music video. So where you combine the hit song, which is a repetitive mantra in a way that keeps them that keeps people just locked into a very narrow perspective of focus, and often the subject matter of the lyrics is not exactly mind expansive, but it's all about, oh, poor me, I'm the victim, or I'm in love,
Right.
hopelessly in love, or I'm trapped by love, or you've trapped me. All these, if you listen carefully to the
It's part of
words
that
of the
victim
lyrics,
mentality that they're preparing us.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you've got that, and then you combine that with symbology
yep.
of the people that are, that they're legendary people controlling the planet, the Illuminati and all these people. They have certain symbology, and you're seeing that symbology blatantly appearing in the music business, and all these, you'll see it in a Beyonce or Lady Gaga or Jay-Z video. There's all this, like,
The emblem. Yeah,
the emblem, they've got
yeah,
all these
yeah.
symbols, and a lot of people think it's funny, and there's that people think that that's, conspiracy is stupid. But you've got to ask yourself, why are
Why are they doing it?
people, why are they doing it? Because it's like
Yeah,
it's a prevalent theme. It's not exactly something that, it's like, a part of you would say that, okay, if that theme's going on, what are some of the other themes? Well, there's not really a lot of other themes that are
yeah.
being explored with in such an adamant way, in such a precise way. If you look at the work by the Vigilante Citizen, for example, I can only recommend people check out the Vigilant Citizen, his website. He explores the subject of mind control using the symbols and symbology in the music scene very, very well. And if you really are interested in the subject, then start exploring the symbols that are being used in pop culture. And you have to ask yourself, why is it that the people creating these videos seem to be such masters of this subject? It's not just a random fluky thing that, JG saw this in a video and now he's doing it in his because it's cool, everyone else is. No, these are precise messages. There's, down to
The name
really,
of his
like,
company, Rockefeller. Rockefeller. I mean,
right.
he's telling you right there where he's standing and who's
Look, and I
behind him.
think part of the method of exploring the stuff of these elitists is to demonstrate, is to show it to us too, to put it right in front of our faces, because I think it's sort of an unspoken law, or maybe it's even a spoken law, that these controlling forces in society, they have to make it a fair playing field. And to make it a fair playing field, they have to put it in front of us and say, okay, here, people, we're manipulating you guys. This is what it looks like. So speak up if you're not happy with it. And if
You
you're
know
not
what
going
that
to speak
reminds
up,
me of? That reminds me of the red and the blue pill in the Matrix. When you put your hands out like that, because that's what it is.
absolutely, that's what it is. It's like, hey, it's like in court, if you don't speak up, then you're consenting. So
Right.
if you need to put up some resistance if you think that there's something wrong with this. And the problem is that we're not being educated about what's being presented to us. We're only being shown the end product. And if you're not smart enough to understand symbology, sacred symbols, sacred geometry, and occult symbology, and ritual symbology, then and you're young and impressionable, like, when you're young, 13 to 25 or 30
Yeah.
years old, you're still not really wise to the world. You're still, most people, especially in this part of the world, I mean, there's people that are one generation away from having been farmers' kids, and now they're living in the
Yeah.
big city, and they're just exploring all things sensational, all things bodily sensational, but not necessarily higher consciousness sensational. And there's no one teaching them these things out there. So, that was another one of the reasons that interested me in filmmaking, is because I tapped into some of that symbology, and it was very fascinating, like the spear of destiny and things like that.
Hmm.
People hear about this stuff, but they don't really understand it. So there's a lot more work to be done in that area, and we have a lot of catching up to do, because these forces that have
Entities,
put this
forces.
out, yeah, maybe they're entities, maybe they're
Yeah.
archons. I mean, no one really knows. I've heard all kinds of definitions. I think you come across all the definitions if you explore the subject matter, but I refrain from saying I have the answer to this is the one group that's doing it. Yeah, it is, but then you find this other group, and then you find this other level, and you realize, okay, come on,
Yeah.
let's
Who's
not be
behind it
too
really?
sure ourselves here. What we can be sure about is that there is something going on. There's definitely a use of symbology, and there's definitely a
Yep.
dumbing down, as you mentioned, in society for a deliberate purpose. There's
Hmm.
even, you notice when you're in a bit dangerous situation, what happens? Your adrenaline kicks in.
Yep.
So you get pushed automatically into a heightened physical and sensory perception modus. And if it's fear based, then it creates you shoot energy from your body. And what we know from having done a show like Timeless, where we learn from people that have had out of body experiences, is that we're not limited to just the sleeves in our physical world. We actually shoot from us energy. And now imagine if there's some group out there which has figured out that which gets off on that, that gets
Collects
off
that
on that
energy.
energy and even collects it, right?
Yeah.
And deliberately has learned that, hey, well, we can take the most vulnerable group, these young kids, we can put this symbology. What's one of the most popular forms of cinema these days, right? Horror. Ever
Right.
notice? Horror
Yeah.
films everywhere, right? Everything's horror. If you go to
Everybody likes horror
Netflix,
movies. Yeah.
they love it. Well, why? Because it gets your adrenaline going, and it
Right.
shoots that. If you knew what was coming
What
off of your
Wes
body,
Craven spoke about that. He said that the reason he got into directing horror movies is because it touched the inner core of the soul, and it brought the emotion out of the person. As different from a comedy or a drama, horror really like makes you think about the worst aspect of what could happen to you, and it makes you reflect on it, and it brings in the adrenaline rush out of you, which is exactly accurate. I mean, Wes Craven, rest in peace, brilliant director, and he knew exactly what he was talking about, which is why he created Freddy Krueger, for example, because it was based on a person that he saw as a kid that brought that fear out of him. And
yeah.
reports of an actual rapist who was killing kids, and he mixed the two and he said, "This is my biggest fear, and I'm gonna put it on film." And again, that's why horror movies are so great. But I wanted to get into another point here about filmmaking. We've seen symbology not only in filmmaking through the years when it comes to aliens, but in teleporting. You had the movie The Fly that came out in the 80s, which was a remake of the earlier movie from the 60s, The Fly, and that talked about teleporting. So these are concepts that are not completely strange from our consciousness, and I think film plays a big part of not only artists expressing their inner thought, but also some artists who might be told by certain individuals, put this in your movie or make a movie about this, and those people behind the scenes are kind of leading the narrative to indoctrinate and get us conditioned to this certain reality, like teleportation, aliens from other planets being good and evil, and all aspects of what space might be like, including other dimensions. Which I saw, I think it was like 10 or 14 or something. Some young kid on YouTube explained the higher dimensions, and I was like, this kid's brilliant, and talk about how society can be dumb in general. In many aspects, but every once in a while you get a kid who's a brilliant kid who explains other dimensions in such a way that you're like, wow, there is some hope for the future, right? And the way he explained it was that, every dimension has a being on it. For example, we can't see dimensions under us, and they can't see dimensions on top of us, but we see our dimension, our third dimension. Now, say you're a fourth dimension being. It could very well be an energy being. And perhaps we're in a third dimension living a life that leads to the path to the next dimension where we call it heaven or hell. And that could just be our next evolutionary step forward into the next dimension or the next realm, which is just a ladder we keep climbing up and up and up until we get to the perfect dimension or the perfection, or it's just something that's endless, whatever it might be. But I think there is definitely a support for that kind of a thought.
Well, we know from our interviews with the protagonists in our films, I think most particularly Packing for Mars, we were talking with Professor J.J. Hertog about a lot of these, you branch off into some of these subject matters, and has been around for quite a while, and he's been privy to inside information, early days of the discoveries of the Jet Propulsion Lab. And not only that, but he was part of a group of researchers that had been tapped by this military scientific branch that was doing exactly that. I think he pretty much told us exactly what you just said, that they actually had a group of people, authors, filmmakers, and people that were in media in the mainstream, that they would routinely and regularly debrief with respect to this is the material that we'd like to see getting out there. I mean, literally was saying that.
Yeah.
So it was pretty
Jackie
much,
Gleason for years was thought of as he's seen some alien stuff and what's told about some of the stuff out there.
well, you realize that the narrative, what people don't really understand is that that there's a narrative going on in the media and the mainstream media. Most people watch the news and what's available on the channels that they've. It started off with a very narrow focus with radio, then it branched off into television with one or two channels. Now there's like thousands of channels. There's YouTube. There's all these mediums of expression. But one thing is clear: that narrative is very tightly controlled by someone.
Yeah.
This is a fact. I think that Millie Weaver's new controversial documentary is the latest example that shows just how tightly that narrative is controlled within the political spectrum. She got herself into apparently a lot of trouble by putting that information out there, which is clear that there are, out of the view of society, there's a private sector which is clandestine, which is a shadow form of control, which uses politics and politicians as their puppets to bring these messages and these ideas into the world that they want to steer. And I think it's only a matter of time before that isn't really a conspiracy theory anymore, but just considered a conspiracy. And because conspiracies really are real. So the fact that this was going on, and J.J. Hertog was talking about the 60s, and we was talking about with respect to what then came out in another one of the very popular forms of cinema is science fiction.
Yeah.
People like science. They like a narrative. This is, it doesn't have to always be horror, although there's a lot of horror in science fiction as well. But this is the medium of choice for introducing the ideas of an extraterrestrial race that might be out there, or races that might be out there, that there's galactic forces that are, out there, which we don't know about, which, we could be victim to. That's a very popular, unfortunately, theme, is that we are going to be attacked by an alien race. We're going to be taken over by an alien race.
Anything is possible.
It's all possible. I mean, Hawkins was saying that it's only a matter of time. But he completely denied, the reality of UFOs that have been going on since, we at least know since the 50s, since the Roswell crash, and at the, starting as early as the 20s and 30s, there's reports of UFO crashes, of reverse engineering the technology. So, I mean, Hawkins, as brilliant as he was, that was his elephant in the room. He just did not look at that. He would just say that there's aliens coming that could be dangerous. I think that's a very dangerous message to put out there, especially if you're respected in the world as he was. I think that if we would have been, victims of this reality, it would have happened by now, because there's enough evidence that the aliens have been out and about and around us. And if they wanted to, they could have taken us out. So I don't think
if you believe the ancient alien theory, I mean, they've been around since the beginning. And it's funny, not to make a joke, because he's no longer with us, but Hawkins didn't have a leg to stand on when it came to that theory. But it would be very ironic if we did one day have a giant UFO land on the White House lawn, as everybody one day thought, oh, that's how it's going to happen. They're going, because it has to be the White House lawn, right? And this giant UFO opens up, and a giant, like 8-foot, 9-foot Native American walks out, and he's like, "How? Now we're taking back the land." That would be very funny and amusing, and very bad in a way. So I understand where Hawkins was coming from. Because the natives feel trapped to that in this very country, and it could happen to us. But at the same time, it is very ignorant to think that a race of beings are going to travel from Alpha Centauri or another light year, 2 light years, 100 light years away, with technology so exotic that for sure their race have become at some point peaceful to be able to come together and create this technology, but to travel the stars just to come to the little blue planet and destroy it, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. At some point you got to say, okay, these beings evolved from just landing on a new land, and say, okay, we're taking over now.
Well, look, I mean, the people that are telling that stuff were probably they were kids at one point watching too many horror films, and now they've grown up, and now they're presenting their inner fears, which were never worked out in the films that they watched, because there was never a purpose other than to scare the hell out of them. So that's the cellular memory that they're carrying around, and now they're executives, and now they're studio executives, or scientists and heads of think tanks and government officials. and they've been impregnated and imbued and programmed with this message, right? So that's what's coming out. But that seems to be the majority of the noise out there, but it isn't the only noise. And there's unfortunately, it's getting prevalence, but it isn't the only answer. There's a lot of evidence and a lot of stuff going on that points completely to the contrary. And the power of knowing that there is another dimension that your consciousness inhabits, that the physical body is not the end, that eliminates one of the most elemental forms of control, and that's fear. Mm-hmm. If we are in fear, most of us are. What does that mean? Fear of what? For most of us, it means the fear of loss of life. We're afraid of losing our body. That means the end, because then it's over. Because we've never met anybody that's been to the other side and come back and said, "Hey, don't worry about it. It's just a temporary state."
It's pleasant, yeah.
Right, and so as long as we're not addressing that, people are living in fear, and so they're exploring those ideas. It's only natural that it happens, but I just think what's going to start happening is that this is going to start breaking down. Imagine Hawking's now; he's on the other side, going, "Damn. I was so far off. I was so off," right? He's going to be one of these guys, and the people developing the soul phone are going like, man, the people are eager to come back and talk. I can understand why. Hawking's just going, man, I got to fix that problem. I really screwed up. I got to explain this, and I want to explain it, and they will, and that will be a critical moment where we will cross over into a new threshold, and then it doesn't matter. That's like a single match lighting up a dark room. I mean, it's going to go poof, and that's going to be the end of that fear-based consciousness. There will no longer be power. Right now, it's happening with Corona. What is the problem here? Why are people wearing masks? Because they're afraid. What are they afraid of? They're afraid of dying, of getting the disease and dying 40 hours later.
Frank, here's the crazy part. And it's funny you jump into the Corona aspect here of this whole thing. I saw a report where there are certain companies, this is going to make you laugh, where they have all their staff members, since they're on lockdown, they can't have them in-house come in and work. They're having them do their conferences and other things through Zoom, Skype, and other chat forms like this. And they're mandating that while they're at home on Skype or on Zoom, that they wear a mask. How idiotic is that?
Oh, I know. I have personal experience with it. I was doing exactly that. I was creating a film, a project for a film company, where there were two projects. One of them was an interview with a director and three of the director, a producer, and two of the actors in the film being released in the UK. And when we did the interview, I was directing it in our room. We had the camera set up, and the people that hired us to make this production, they got upset when we were sitting too close together without masks on in the room from which we were doing our Zoom, directing. And I'm like, oh my God. And then the other project we were filming because there was no longer a trade show where people could get together and exchange ideas. Now they had to do it virtually. So the film company, and we created a way for them to, in the form of a talk show, which we staged completely. It was a complete spoof. But here we were in the room filming, and we were like lots of time. When you're filming something, man, you're sitting shoulder to shoulder, looking into cameras, looking into the results, and we had to keep that absolutely secret, because if they found out that we were so close together, we would have problems. We would political problems, and even to the point where people are getting fined if they're too close together. It's just nuts. But this is going back to this whole concept of fear, and I've been really deliberately exploring that frontier, because I don't honestly subscribe to the virus theory. Okay, I just, when I was doing my first steps into paranormal experiences, into greater consciousness expansion, of course you touch on the idea of germs and bacteria and viruses, and the whole virus theory is still a theory. It's like the theory of evolution, the theory of viruses. They don't know what viruses are. They have a theory about what they might be based on what the reaction is of the environment, but they have never even seen one. And we've got all these pictures of this prickly thing floating around and just to use for us to program us. And it seems like to me what's going on with Corona is like a giant mind control experiment where they're exploiting our fear of death to hypnotize us into a certain form of submission. And
Yeah.
because when I'm out there, I've been exposed to people shoulder to shoulder without wearing masks. And honestly, I deliberately inhale the environment because my body has been physically engineered over millions of years to take in the germs and viruses of the environment and to process that information organically. It's an amazing machine. It's not
Yeah.
just an organic physical machine, it's also a psycho-spiritual machine that extends outside the time-space continuum. It's a whole unit. And so I'm just relying on that amazing technology which has been created for this dimension to process the virus information. And I got to say, it's like I don't see it, I don't feel it, I don't see this thing going on. I don't even have any people in my circle of friends that know anybody that has it. So I'm like, is it just me in my world that I created one where the coronavirus doesn't exist, or am I being selfish? But I don't know. I'm exploring it. I'm exploring the subject matter, and it's kind of irritating that the narrative's been hijacked by this fear thing and wearing the masks and all the symbology associated with wearing masks as well.
Yep.
It's like you have a muzzle. You're muzzled from expressing yourself. And then you play upon the fear of those who are not ready to go beyond the physical and explore the idea of life beyond the physical realm. And so they are holding you accountable for their potential death because you are not following by the same rules that they need to follow. It's an incredible social experiment going on right now. And and there's no dialogue happening in the public. There's only two extremes. There's the side that says it's absolutely going on. There's absolutely a virus. It's absolutely this physical thing. It'll come in and land on you like a mosquito, attack you and kill you, versus, the virus theory, versus the people saying, no, there's no science to back that masks protect you, that viruses can kill you. And they're just talking about the physical antidote to the fear antidote. But nobody's talking about the fact that, hey, people, it's not just that or just this. It's a more encompassing dialogue that's going on here. It's encompassing the idea of control and fear in society, and nobody's talking. I mean, the fear of a virus is so great, which means the fear of a death is so great that people are willing to tear down the complete structure of their society, ruin their economy, destroy their jobs, whatever it is that they're doing that's just destroying everything because of this fear, instead of saying, you know what, I'm going to embrace the fear, and if I'm one of the people, life is a risk. If I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out, and then I'll just change, sleeves. But when they don't do that, what we're seeing is a complete destruction of those things. And maybe it's a good thing because maybe it's pushing us to the point where we're saying, okay, that's enough. Enough is enough. And I guess we needed something push us really hard against the wall and really fast against the wall for us to make that decision.
Well, the whole word fear brings me back to a very wise quote from a very small Muppet, one named Yoda. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate always leads to suffering. That's the path of the Jedi. That's what the Jedis, are the way they are because they don't give in to fear. Starting off, that was the downfall of Anakin. He feared for his wife's death as he feared for his mother's death. He feared for the dying body, not the soul, the body. And one of the aspects I always talk about when I talk to religious people is they're scared of death. I'm like, why are you afraid of dying? You believe in heaven, you believe in God, you believe in the afterlife. Hell, this should be a great passage towards the future for you, but you're going to be exactly where you want to go. So what's to be scared about? Here I am sitting here. I have my father who's in quarantine. His girlfriend's in quarantine. My uncle, his daughter, and his wife are all in quarantine for COVID-19 because they all tested positive. My father, one got tested when his girlfriend got tested. Now they're going through this. He got tested. They said he was negative. Then he went home, got tested the next day again because he was feeling worse, and they told him, "Oh yeah, no, you're positive." Just yesterday he was negative when he was feeling bad. Now he's feeling worse. Goes back to tell him, "Okay, no, you actually are positive." So what's the exact examination? What's going on? Why is there two different answers? But he's quarantined. Thankfully, he's doing well. He's not. He said, "I have no fever. I have, even his girlfriend who was pretty sick didn't get a fever. She's getting over it." I've had 13 people in my life since this whole thing came down that have tested positive, Frank, and not one have died. And
Well,
I've had
look,
3 deaths this year that have happened, and none of them have been COVID related. And
when what's happened is that the entire health uh, discussion in our world has become dominated and centered around COVID-19. What about the normal flu anymore? I mean, 2 years ago, my mother's in an old age home, and she's got dementia, and a lot of the people around her are on their last leg. And
sorry,
2 years
yeah,
ago, there was a flu wave, and over 10 people in her facility died. Now that's more than
yeah,
half. That's about half the people, or a third or something. Like it's a high percentage of people.
hmm
I mean, a lot of vacancies became available in that old age home 2 years ago, and nobody talked about it. If they would have made a news report for every single person that died in that facility, multiplied by all the people that died in that flu wave of 2018, then it would have been considered a pandemic, but
yeah, yeah,
by any standard. But now what's happened is we can't even have a normal flu. Most people that I worked with last year, they got sick 2-3 times over the winter,
yeah.
bad colds, really bad. And I was around them, and I got through it. And I think at one time I got a little bit of a sore throat. I'm generally, thankfully, a very healthy person, and my immune system is pretty good. And I think a lot of it has to do with nutrition and keeping your body tuned. And another thing that isn't really being discussed in society, of course, it's all very simple: take this pill or take this needle and you'll be fine. No, your body's not just a needle and pill recipient. Your body is actually something which you should tune like an instrument. If you're going to play a
Yeah.
guitar, you want to put new strings on that guitar. Your guitar's going to
Correct.
sound like crap after a couple of months. So you have
Yeah.
to tune the guitar, you have to tune your instrument, just like you have to tune your body, and that involves taking care of your body nutritionally, because the way we deal with viruses in our body and swimming, which is swimming with trillions of them, is that
Correct.
we have to maintain the edge over our immune system, so that our immune system's always a little bit a step ahead of the negative stuff swimming around our body, which is swimming around there all the time. We're swimming through a sea of potential dangerous viruses and things in our environment all the time. But we don't talk about that. We just talk about like we're this envelope that's sealed off, and now some mosquitoes punctured it with a virus, and we're going to die. I mean,
It's
it's
lunacy.
just such a
It's
simple,
lunacy.
stupid dialogue. It's just when
Yeah.
if people were to really expand themselves a little, if this was being brought to us in the media or in the school system, it just isn't. So we've become reduced to this super simplified model, which does not even come close to expressing what reality and physical stuff is all about. And that's why people have a hard time believing it when we have someone in Packing for Mars talking about teleportation or the chronovisor. The chronovisor was developed in the 1950s by a scientist who was who was under the Vatican, because
hmm
they figured out a way to tune into resonant waves that were left behind in the magnetosphere. Now, science that has been proven by people like Michael Persinger, who we had in Solar Revolution, that
hmm
this stuff is stored out there, and there's a way to tap this stuff in, like there is a way to tune in your radio station, like the one you should be tuning into right now, listening to our discussion, I think. But
Yes, indeed.
and if this stuff is going, and we need to be aware of that stuff, and we have people talking about that in Packing for Mars. It's real. It's not just some crazy conspiracy theory. It only sounds that way because you've just been dumbed down, as we talked about earlier, or you've allowed yourself to be deliberately limited or focused upon a very narrow bandwidth of emotional and spiritual and scientific information, instead of opening your eyes to other possibilities. One of the things that I think that I wish people that are critical of conspiracy theorists, or actually right extreme conspiracy theorists, as now we've been promoted to, is I just wish they would accept that their perspective is limited, and it's a deliberately limited focus, and leave
hmm
the rest of us to explore the outer limits. so that we can report back, and when they're ready to dip their toe into their own expansion, that they can rest assured that there's a comfortable, warm body of us out there that have been waiting for them to make that leap.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're short on time, but I did want to address this because you had on the Packing for Mars documentary a very interesting set of people in there, which I am very aware of and very close to. One is Mr. Stephen Bassett, who's been on my show probably more than anybody else, other than maybe Robert Morningstar. We've had him on both a lot. Steve Bassett and I go back a decade plus, where he's a good friend. I love the man. He's absolutely 100% on point when it comes to the stuff he's worked on over the years. And I even on air, I said, I hope one day you're proven 100% right. Because the stuff and the fight that man has put forward in ufology alone, he deserves a statue somewhere. He is one of my heroes in ufology. But you had also Lauren Eisenhower, Laura, by the way, my show a decade ago was the second show that she was ever on, and the first on video. We interviewed her on our video, Skywatchers Radio TV, and we found her fascinating 10 years ago. And she's still, doing the same, argument about the story about Mars and what she's gone through. And there's a lot of good information on these documentaries. Are you working on anything now coming up that is in the same genre? Are you expanding a little bit? Or what's happening in the near future for you?
Yeah, well, just on Laura, I wanted to add, actually, Laura was the key person to trigger me to re-explore the Mars theme, because I think maybe she was on the first interview she ever did that I heard by coincidence, because it was about 10 years ago. I think it was about 10 years ago that I started the process of filming Packing for Mars. It took 5 more years to complete it, and very fascinating personality in our world right now, taking a very interesting role, kind of like a punk spiritual warrior, as I called it back then. But yeah, what we're working on now is we're working on a couple of projects that we aren't really disclosing yet. We tend to be very secretive about what we do, because we feel it dissipates the energy somewhat if we go on too much about what we're working on, and we can't exactly crowdfund some of this stuff, because some of it is so sensitive that it would draw not only the positive attention if we were trying to raise money for it, but also possibly negative attention that we don't necessarily want. But I can say that one of the things that we've been in the early stages of completing is the next series in the series of films that we do with Klaus Donna. There's a film we did called The Klaus Donna Chronicles, Secret World 1, and that was sort of documenting Klaus. For those who don't know who Klaus is, he's a Austrian out-of-place artifacts researcher, and ties into the subject of, our history and technology that may have existed, because he's documented and found evidence of technologies that existed millions possibly of years ago, which obviously would contradict everything that we've learned in the regular form of school science and archaeology. And he's been down in the Philippines kind of treasure hunting for the Yamashito gold for the last couple of years, and has made some amazing discoveries and some amazing breakthroughs. So we're going to be putting some of that into a new film for Klaus Donna, so you can be looking for that coming out in the next while. Awesome. And that's something that we've planned to do with him for quite a while yet. It's just very difficult with all of us living so far apart from one another. All of us are, when we explore this fringe material, we're not exactly, it's like you have to fund it all yourself. So you have to kind of do it on the side, and you don't want to compromise the integrity of the information. You don't want to be beholden to a sponsor and therefore have a bandwidth that you have to stay to because of your crossing
you
over.
become part of the problem and not part of the solution.
Right. So
information out there.
One of the things that I decided from the start is that I didn't want to have that filter. I wanted to explore subject matter unfiltered and go as deep as I wanted to, without any political influence, without any other influence. And we've maintained that concept and principle to this day, and we intend on maintaining it moving forward into the future. So yeah, but otherwise people can check out our website, like www.packingformarsmovie.com if they don't know about Packing for Mars. There's always amazing that we don't really have the marketing muscle of a major television or film studio. It amazes me that really the bandwidth, the amount of people that have seen Packing for Mars is still very little compared to that have seen like
Yeah.
Avatar or some major film. So any promotion that we get, and it just introduces a new audience to them. I'm always amazed that I'm still getting letters and responses from people from all parts of the world that have just now discovered Packing for Mars. And the cool thing is that Packing for Mars, although we released it just over about 4.5 years ago,
Yeah.
officially.
2015, right? Yeah.
Well, at the end of 2015, we brought out a
Yeah.
preliminary release, and 2016 was when it really, the official final
Right.
version got released. And ever since then, I mean, the material on the film is still cutting edge. It's still revolutionary. There's still a subject matter being explored in Packing for Mars, despite the wave of David Wilcock, Corey Goode, out there versions of a secret space program that aren't explored by them, that we explored in Packing for Mars, and we were exploring it years before anybody else did. So, which is
Right.
kind of cool, because we've been in a way vindicated that our efforts to make a film that was sound and interesting and explores it multidimensionally, not just from a physical standpoint, but from a mental and spiritual standpoint. We have Big Bye in the film talking about something called Zenimti, which is, the idea of what keeps people from exploring this. I mean, there's a lot of subjects in the film which are cool. We also did Solar Revolution, which was a film that we produced in the course of making Packing for Mars, which deals with the influence of the cosmic radiation hitting us right now, which is contributing to the involuntary evolution of humanity, which all of it is together adding to this next evolutionary leap that we're expecting we're going to make, and we're expecting that we make it sooner rather than later. So those three projects were kind of like the pivotal projects: Klaus Donna Chronicles, Packing for Mars, and Solar Revolution, that led us to, we produced, that Timeless series, and now we're working on the next Klaus Donna, and we've got a bunch of other projects which are quietly evolving in the background.
Frank, whenever you have anything you want to promote, man, it'll be an honor and a pleasure to put it on the website, cross promote it as much as possible here on our networks, and bring you back on often as possible. Just I want you to do me one favor: stay safe. We joke about the virus, we talk about the virus, we acknowledge that a lot of it's hoaxy, but at the end of the day, we all have to keep our composure and stay safe, because you never know, you might be a targeted individual and they might go after you. And
I agree.
how technology works, there might be something in the air that gets into you. Nanobot technology, G5, you never know. Conspiracies are facts. You know what
We
I'm
didn't even
saying?
get into geoengineering, and we didn't get into
Yeah.
that. So yes, this stuff exists, and thank you very much for that. And I of course extend that to you as well, because you're obviously promoting and putting out subject matter which is crashing down the walls of the status quo, which
That's what we're
which
trying to.
has shown historically has a great level of resistance
Yep.
for it as well.
Thank you so much for being here with me tonight, man. And I want to bring you on before the year's over and talk more with you. I know we're limited to only an hour on the show, unfortunately, because you have other shows coming up. But I really want to get more in depth with you on the other projects. Like you said, we've only skimmed the surface here, and it's been an honor and a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
We'll talk soon again, sir.
Would look forward to it.